Extreme sports games were a popular theme on the PlayStation during its time that saw a multitude of different titles, varying across different genres, that would reach mass appeal. While many of them were considered to be popular, there was many that were kind of in between and hit and miss, and some that weren't as good. But aside from the overall quality of each of these titles, there pretty much was something for everybody on the console. That was one of the main traits and selling points of the experiences that you could have on the console itself. And with many of these extreme sports games, there was quite a number of snowboarding titles that were released, again that varied in quality. You had the likes of the Snowboarder series, and even other big name brands with MTV Sports also throwing their hat in the ring with regards to capitalising on this very popular trend during the late 90s and early 2000s. But towards the end of the 90s, in 1999 more specifically, and in early 2000, Capcom would see a release of Trickin' Snowboarder that would act as a follow-up to the developer Cave Entertainment's previous game, which was Steep Slope Sliders, that saw a release originally in the arcade and also on the Sega Saturn. But Trickin' Snowboarder was a console exclusive title, but it would only be released on the PlayStation. That consists of a variety of different modes that takes players through 10 stages in total, where you have to meet specific goals for completion, similar to other extreme sports games. If you look at the likes of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series, you'll know what I mean, where each level gives you access to primary objectives that you need to acquire by performing the best tricks, stunts, searching for items, achieving the quickest times and the best overall scores. You can also play multiplayer with your mates, and you have access to different types of stages that you can play on, either from downhill slope to slalom events, half-pipe events, where it just consists of gaining the highest amount of tricks and scores possible. You can also race against other opponents on each of the downhill slopes or tracks, and many of them consist of windy downhill courses with loads of different jump points that you can use in order to initiate different tricks. But you also have obstacles and other features to avoid as well that can hinder your progress. At its time of release, the game did receive mixed reception with regards to reviews, many stating that the game was decent in terms of its visuals and what it was trying to do, but didn't have the same control systems or similar elements seen in other titles likes of Cool Borders and other games of the same caliber. In many ways, even from my own experience playing it, it is a decent game, but the control system does seem somewhat sluggish. In many instances, you would have to hold either the R or L1 buttons on the controller to navigate and to try and twist the character around, and the camera sometimes doesn't fully follow the character as you're moving, so sometimes it can be a bit of a delay in terms of how the camera rotates around the player itself, so that can throw you off. And sometimes it just feels overly sluggish in terms of how it moves and how it feels, even with initiating tricks. While some of them are easy to perform, which require different button combinations, everything's about timing, but the clunkiness of the controls, or more so the sluggishness of the controls, can hamper the experience for some. And I think that was really what people were getting at with regards to the reviews back in the day, as that was one of its main gripes. But even with that, one of the main and unique selling points of this game was the Easter eggs that were in it, and the cheat system that gave you access to an extra selection of characters from a very popular franchise also by Capcom, which as we all know is Resident Evil 2 more specifically. And the game allows you to play as both Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and you can also play as a zombie cop, which is quite crazy. So they all have their own traits and attributes with regards to their skill sets. The zombie cop probably being the least flexible of all of the characters you can choose, but it's still fun to play. And they even have their own interactions in terms of like damage, or that you would be more familiar with in the likes of Resident Evil 2 itself. It carries over into this game, so if you hit something, the zombie will groan, or if Claire hits something, she'll kind of like yell, and Leon will do the same. So for fans of Resident Evil, it'll be instantly familiar, and I think that's what helped this game to sell in the way that it did, even though it wasn't considered as popular for its time compared to other titles in the genre. But I think it was because of the fact is with the addition of the Resident Evil 2 characters that left a lot of intrigue, with people wanting to know more about it, just for that reason alone, more than anything. But at the same time, it probably takes away from the overall experience of the game, because the game, when we look back at it, even though it's a decent enough game, game for what it does represent. It's not the best snowboarding game on the PlayStation by any means, but many of it remember it more so for the additional characters over the experience of the game itself. So in some ways, while it was a great addition, in other ways it probably took away from the experience. So I suppose there's pros and cons to it, but at the end of the day, it's really down to the individual and how you perceive it when you're playing it. But for many of us, especially going back to the old school days of gaming, there was nothing better than seeing your favourite characters appearing in different games, kind of like in Easter eggs, and even just using it as a promotional tool or utility in order to promote other games in the series, also by the same developers or creators. And you often seen this way back in the early days of the PlayStation with the likes of Namco, more specifically when you looked at the Ridge Racer games. Any game pretty much by Namco, or even Psygnosis with Destruction Derby and the like. You often seen banners or hidden Easter eggs throughout the levels or the tracks you're racing on, and they'd always be using those banners in order to promote the other games that they were currently selling, or arcade ports of other games that they had available on the console during that time. So that was another really cool way to market different franchises and just to generally make more sales. But I think it was just a really cool aesthetic just for a gamer back then, just to see that when you're experiencing these games for the first time, that you could also see that, oh, there's other games from this developer, I'd like to see what that's all about. So that's what got you intrigued, and that's what got you to explore many of the titles that were on the PlayStation. It really helped to sell the games back in the day. Even when we look back at the demos played a really good role, and a very important role, in the sales and experiences of these games on the system. So it was still very cool to see. Unfortunately, when we look at the likes of modern day games, things like this and all these Easter eggs and all of these little tricks and marketing ploys, you just don't see them anymore, which is a pity. It truly is, because the one thing that those attributes did really well was that they invoked a sense of curiosity and also triggered a sense of nostalgia as well with players during their experience. And modern games don't seem to reenact that at all, and if they do, it's very, very seldom, which is a pity. But it's still good to go back to play some of these earlier titles, just to experience all of these unique traits and quips about them. Like, even when I go back to this game more specifically, like, I never got to play it back in the day, but the main reason why I wanted to play it again was to get access to the Resident Evil 2 characters, and I think that everybody else that was interested in the game, most people would have had the same interest. It's still a fun title, there's a lot of cool elements to it. It's not the worst snowboarding game on the system, and there is actually quite a few, funnily enough. The more I dive into this catalogue of games on the PlayStation, it is quite insane to see or to find that there's even more games that you never even heard of. Like, there's games that would have been released in Europe that you either never heard of, there's games in Japan that we definitely never heard of, and only now in the modern era we are becoming familiar with them. So my goal is to try and explore and experience as many of them as I can and share them with you all. And from some that I have played, there's actually some real hidden gems there, but there's also some games that for many you would probably best avoid, but I still think that they're worth talking about, as they do present a unique case study just to show the differences between one or the other, and that way then people can make a decision for themselves, because something that I may not like another person might like. And the one thing, even when I go back to the likes of even comments like on videos and so forth, people are quick to judge, but the one thing we have to remember is that many of us growing up, not everybody had access to these consoles, not everybody had access to many games. Like, the games that we had in front of us at that time were probably the only games that we ever had, and they were the only experiences that we ever had. So if we say that a game was the best that we've ever played, it might actually be for that person, because that's probably the only experience that they managed to have back then. I know others won't see it that way, and they'll be quick to jump on the bandwagon and to diss them and say, oh, what are you talking about? But at the same time, we always have to try and think from other people's perspectives and points of view. That's the way I try to approach it, because everybody's experience is different, everybody's experience is unique. This game for many may not be considered the best, but it is the best for some. So when we think of it like that, it makes a lot of sense. But the experience is what you make of it at the end of the day. And again, the PlayStation provided that in abundance. There was so many unique experiences to be taken away from this fantastic console, regardless of the games we played or have yet to play. There's still more experiences out there to be explored. So by sharing these videos, it will give you a glimpse of what to expect should you go down that path. But I would love to know your thoughts of Trick and Snowboarder for the PlayStation if you have played it yourself, and what do you think of it overall. Do you think it's a fun game, or were you like many of us that were only interested in gaining access to the Resident Evil 2 characters just to play as them alone? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of snowboarding games or extreme sports games that were also released on the PlayStation, you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.